Hello, my name is Mariah Yori, and I'm going to be talking to you today about using goats for land management and the control of invasive plants. I know y'all have all heard of invasive species, but just to give you a good definition from the Georgia Invasive Species Council, they define an invasive plant as any species, including its seeds, spores, or other biological material capable of propagating that species, that is not native to that ecosystem and whose introduction does or is likely to cause environmental harm. I've got here some pictures of some pretty common ones that we'll see in Georgia. To the right-hand side, I've got ivy, in particular English ivy. At the top, we've got a picture of Bradford pears. That's these trees with all these white flowers. In the top left corner, we see kudzu. Top or bottom left corner, we see some privet. And so why is this important or of note? Because UGA Extension has cited back in 2023 that as of 2021, there were 33,000 acres of kudzu in Georgia forests. And there were, back in 2021 as well, there were 664,000 acres of privet in Georgia alone. And not only are these invasive species harming our ecosystem, pushing out our native species, but they're contributing to overgrowth, which affects agricultural land that we then can't use. It affects rural and urban areas. And it's just not something, especially with our growing population, that we want to allow to continue, because we need space for housing and for agricultural use for growing food. So ways of managing it are manual land clearing. That's going to be with a lot of your big equipment, depending on how big the job is. That might mean big equipment like this in the picture. It might just mean chainsaws, but either way, it's going to be costly. It's going to be labor intensive. It's going to be time consuming. And depending on the hazard of falling trees, the lay of the land, it can be quite dangerous. We also use chemicals. Unfortunately, those are not species specific a lot of the times and will kill a lot of desirable plant species. It decreases our biodiversity by doing that and by possibly affecting the water supply and killing insects and fish, and can just create all these other ecological impacts. And, to the person using it, can even be toxic to them if they were to be exposed to it in an incorrect form. Or one last option that we have is goats. They are a great option for this because they have little to no effect on the soil. They're small, so they don't cause a lot of soil compaction or erosion like large equipment. They maintain that biodiversity. They oftentimes will leave a lot of the good plants and take out a lot of the bad plants. They're not affecting your insects. They're not affecting your other mammals, the rabbits, the deer that are going through there. They're going to be pooping that whole time that they're out there eating. So they're going to be fertilizing the soil with their manure. And interestingly about goats, they tend to eat the seeds in a very immature stage. So the seeds don't typically get deposited in the manure and spread that way. They can be profitable to the owner because you can feed them on all these invasive species, clear all this growth with them, and then sell them for meat. And they're also just great at their job. But what makes them so good at their job? So you can see we've got these three classifications of ruminants. You have grazers. That's your animals here on the right of this chart. This is going to be your cattle and your sheep. They eat a lot of very fibrous material, a lot of grasses at a very few times a day. Then on the left-hand side, the other extreme, you're going to have your concentrate selectors. This is deer, moose, giraffes. And they eat constantly. They are high prey predators, and so they're constantly on the move. So they want fast meals, highly digestible, lots of protein. They're going to be eating all the time. But then in the middle here, you've got these intermediate types. They have kind of the best of both worlds and have really adapted to a lot of different terrains and areas. And that includes a lot of wild species like reindeer, other types of deer, ibex. But then our one domestic species that falls into this category is the goat. So goats are opportunistic eaters. They've got these nimble little mouths with almost prehensile-like lips, so they can really pick out the best material. And they will eat a lot of different things because of this. In a study cited by Hart, goats prefer browse over other plant species, and that is shown in this study here that was done in Texas that compared cattle, sheep, and goats and what percentages of different plant species they consumed. You can see cattle consume mostly grass. Sheep were also mostly grass, whereas goats were mostly browse. That's going to be these woody species. However, even though that's their preference, you can see here they were about 70% browse, 20% grass, 10% forbs. They will adapt based on the availability of the plants and will continue to choose the most nutritious plants available to them in their environment. And so another study cited by Hart mentioned that goats will go from about an 80% availability of browse eating, or the browse being 80% of their diet, to then grasses being 80% of their diet, just based on what environment they're in and what is available to them. So they are very adaptive in what they will eat. This adaptation creates this dilution effect and will put them at a decreased risk of toxicity, because that wide variance in the diet means they are going to be eating a lot less of very specific toxins. So they might eat a toxic plant, but it's going to be a small part of everything they're going to eat that one day. And studies have also even shown that the rumen microbes in a goat are able to more easily metabolize toxic and anti-nutritive compounds than the microbes in cattle or sheep, and this is in particular tannins and mimicine. So they also add variety to their diet by being able to eat woody plants and forages, because they have the ability to process lignin better than cattle or sheep do. In a study by Solanikov in 1989, he found that 71 to 76% of the lignin he was feeding to a group of goats was unaccounted for in their feces and urine, so it was being digested and being used by the goat. And that's why you'll see goats like here on the right eating tree bark off trees, and the trees will be left like here on the left-hand side, they'll be left girdled, which means that a ring has been disrupted in the bark of the tree and disrupted that vasculature, and eventually that tree will die and be able to be removed. And this is how goats can help control lots of different trees, but those include our invasive ones like Bradford pears. So as you can see, there's a lot of possibilities for goats to be used. They can be used in agricultural settings to reclaim marginal lands for cattle or crops to then be used on. They can be used in rural and urban settings, like in parks, to help clean them up, even in people's backyards. You've got a picture here of them at an airport, helping to keep that clean. And they're used pretty extensively out in California to create fire breaks to prevent the spread of wildfires. So this is a great idea going forward ecologically and environment or economically, and just an all-around great use of these great creatures. So thank you. I hope you have learned something interesting today, and here is all of my references.